From the Roman Empire to Great Britain, the question of which are the greatest superpowers in history has always been a controversial question. In this video, we want to answer the question of which are the biggest and most powerful empires in history. The British Empire is the largest empire in history. This extent was so large that Britain controlled about 23% of the world and 21% of the world's population until 1922. And also the phrase "the empire on which the sun never sets," it shows the extent of this empire. In the 19th century, Britain, as the unrivaled superpower in the world, controlled all the world's trade routes. This powerful government was established by the order of Queen Elizabeth I and entered into competition with the empires of Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands, and early on, by defeating Spain, it won the title of the most powerful navy in the world. And in the next 100 years, with the colonization of North America and India, it managed to distance itself from its competitors and until the 18th century, when the United States separated from Great Britain and the new continent of Australia was discovered. Then, in the war with France, they succeeded in capturing many parts of French African colonies. And in the 19th century, after defeating Napoleon, Britain became the world's unrivaled superpower. And the era of British superpower continues until the 20th century and the Second World War. And it can be said that Britain was one of the few empires that came close to dominating the world. With the beginning of the 20th century, British dominance over the world economy is limited due to the growth of Germany and America. Until after the Second World War, due to the injuries and losses caused by the war, India declared its independence very soon. And over time, all British colonies declare their separation from Britain. And this is how the British Empire loses the title of world superpower. It is interesting to know that the Persian Empire has the title of the largest empire in history in terms of population, because this empire ruled over 46% of the world's people. As a result, it can be said that the Persian Empire was close to dominating the whole world. To the extent that in 480 BC, 1 out of every 2 people in the world lived in the Persian Empire. This empire was founded by Cyrus in the 6th century BC and reached the peak of power and authority a century later by Darius. But due to reasons such as failure by the Greeks, they lose the opportunity to dominate the world. Although the size of the Roman Empire is smaller compared to the previous governments, but due to its long peak period and its deep impact on history, it deserves high respect and attention. This empire was close to dominating the world long before you could imagine it. And during the power of this empire, it controlled more than 20% of the world. In addition to dominating Europe, the Romans succeeded in conquering North Africa and Western Asia. As you have seen in various games, the Roman army was one of the most well-equipped armies in the world in addition to the high order. But the government that prevented the Romans from dominating the world was the Parthians Empire, who won most of their battles with the Romans. One of the reasons for the decline and weakening of the Roman Empire was that they grew too large, and managing such a vast territory was an impossible task. Therefore, in 286 AD, Emperor Constantine the Great divided the empire into 2 parts, Eastern Rome and Western Rome, for better control. Western Rome was invaded by Germanic tribes for many years until this empire fell into history in 1476. In the 15th century, Christopher Columbus records the discovered areas under the name of the Spanish Empire. Exactly from this moment the era of authority and power as well as colonization of this empire begins. Next, things like the genocide of the Native Americans or the exploitation of new resources using African slaves, as well as the boom in sea trade, made Spain become a world power in the 16th century. But at the end of the 16th century, with the defeat by Britain, it lost this position forever. But it still remains one of the colonial power. Until in the 17th century, with the defeat by Napoleon, it was severely weakened and lost many of its colonies. During a century and a half, this government had the largest amount of gold, as well as the best ships and the largest navy in the world. To the extent that Spain managed to control 13% of the world. The Ottoman Empire was founded by Osman at the end of the 13th century, and 150 years later, Its reign began with the destruction of the Eastern Roman Empire, and they reached the peak of power in the 16th century in the era of King Solomon. One of the characteristics of the Ottoman Empire was that they had a high ability to manage their vast territory, which was made up of different races. This empire has taken over many countries and governments, the biggest of which was the capture of Constantinople, the capital of Eastern Rome. They were so powerful that they came close to capturing the city of Vienna in the heart of Europe. If this happened, they would have succeeded in conquering a large part of Europe. It is interesting to know that the Ottoman Empire at the height of its glory controlled only 3.5% of the world. And at the end of this empire in the beginning of the 20th century and in the First World War, due to the defeat and the costs and damages incurred due to the war in 1923, it falls apart.